About a month ago, I sat down and started writing a script for a video tentatively titled Why I'm Excited for the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I wanted to make that video because I'd only really discussed the things that concerned me about the remake, at least on the channel, and I got the impression that most of you thought I hated everything about it, which just isn't true. The problem is that, at the time, I'd only gotten a chance to play the demo featuring the first boss fight and nothing else. When I set out to make a video on that demo experience, which was my last video on the game, I kept seeing the same things praised by absolutely everybody, but almost nobody talking about the things that were very reasonable to criticize. As a result, even though I had an equal number of great, good, and bad experiences in that demo, my script was pretty heavily skewed towards discussion of the bad aspects, because I'd simply not seen a whole lot of discussion about them. The excitement video I originally set out to write though was almost entirely dealing with things in the theoretical. All I had was that boss fight demo and a whole lot of speculation. Then, like some kind of divine favour from Bandai Namco Australia and Square Enix EU, I was invited to a Final Fantasy VII Remake preview event hosted by none other than Yoshinori Kitase. I played over 3 hours of the game across 4 different story chapters, and I even had the privilege of asking Yoshinori Kitase questions about the game directly. Naturally then, this video no longer needs to be solely theoretical or speculative. I have a whole lot more to talk about now. I wish I could say this deeper dive into the game has washed away all my concerns, but unfortunately that isn't the case. You're going to have to wait until part 2 for the concerns though, because this video, part 1, we're focusing on the good stuff, and it's about time we got started. This video is brought to you in part by Tokyo Treat. Use the link in the video description to learn more and treat yourself. We should probably start with the biggest and most obvious change from the original, and that's how the game looks. Of course, it looks fantastic. Some people say that the original has its own charm, and it kind of does, but even the biggest nostalgia glasses in the world can't make the original Final Fantasy VII as charming as the beautiful pixel art that came before it, or the much more matured 3D graphics that followed it. I'm not going to pretend that Final Fantasy VII Remake is objectively the best looking game ever made, or that it's the most graphically impressive game out there, but it is certainly up there with the best in those categories. It's exceedingly rare for a JRPG to have this level of production value in the graphics department. It's definitely a sight to behold. Thankfully, the graphical shortfalls I noted in my experience with the first boss demo several months ago have all been solved. The hair rendering issue that caused all the hair to look like Swiss cheese has all but disappeared. I've still got just a tiny little bit of concern that the visual and environmental variety might not be all it could be thanks to the restriction of it all happening inside Midgar, but I'm much more comfortable now believing that my eyes are in for a visual treat the whole way through than I was before the preview session. There are some other really neat things that add to the visual presentation too. At the preview event, Yoshinori Kitase spoke about several different AI engines and tools that were working behind the scenes to control the cameras during cutscenes, visualize emotions in the characters' faces, and even dynamically lip sync the voice lines. This means that no matter which language you play on at launch, I believe there are 4 audio languages total, the lip syncing will be close to perfect. Speaking of audio, we have to talk about the music. When it was revealed Uematsu wouldn't be doing the whole OST like before, I wouldn't say I was disappointed, but I was kind of like, that's a shame. But all of his original tracks are still here in some form, along with tracks from the compilation titles, or Advent Children at the very least. They're just fresh new arrangements of all these iconic tracks, and they're implemented in a brilliant way. It's not just dynamic volume, it's dynamic music. Instead of having a track for a whole area and a track for battle, you have different arrangements of the same track that fade in and out seamlessly to help set the mood. Like having a thinner, quieter arrangement playing while you're just walking around the area, which grows into a louder, more aggressive version when you initiate battle. Now, this isn't how it always works. Sometimes there are multiple tracks for the same area, and that's because the music is set to complement the story, rather than a rigid area and battle track approach. Since this first entry of Final Fantasy VII Remake is largely linear, I expect there to be a really good flow with the music, and based on hearing an Advent Children track in the game during the preview session, it should be a real treat. combat is something that is going to feature in the next video, but it's also going to feature in this one. While I'm not enjoying some aspects of the combat, there are undoubtedly some great things about it. Enemy mechanics are a big highlight of the new system. Bosses are more unique and engaging, and interesting encounters aren't just limited to bosses either. In Chapter 2, you'll start to run into regular enemies that require positioning. Shinra troops holding large shields will block your attempts to attack from the front, and there's even what appears to be an optional mini-boss or elite enemy in the area that is like one of these riot troops but on steroids. This is in contrast to your average traditional ATB system that makes most non-boss enemies, and even some bosses, feel largely the same to fight against. You'll often find yourself using the same strategy or the same abilities to win a majority of the overall encounters. The new combat in FF7R allows you to deploy much more diverse strategies, and it should help the combat stay fresher for longer. The bosses, of course, feature more unique and interesting mechanics. The aim here appears to be much longer and much more epic encounters than in the original. They play out like their own set pieces, but you're in control of the action for the majority of the time. The 3 bosses I faced all had multiple phases, each with different mechanics which required a constant change of strategy. There was even one instance where the eventual boss fight of the chapter was influenced by story choices I made earlier in the chapter. I did like that particular interaction and what it meant for the intermingling of story and gameplay aspects, but I will be talking about the execution of that chapter in particular in the next video. Something I also want to mention briefly in the combat section is the all-new materia and upgrade system. We were dumped into specific chapters in the preview session, so we never saw tutorials or explanations of how the new systems work exactly, but I did spend a few minutes poking around in the menus, and it looks like the character customization is a lot deeper than it was in the original. Each materia now appears to have a somewhat sphere grid-like upgrade system, allowing you to spend a specified resource, increasing or adding stat bonuses that the materia will grant to the user. Weapons also appear to have a similar upgrade system in place. Moving on to side quests, it's not something that I did actually get hands-on experience with, but I did ask Yoshinori Kitase about it. More specifically, I asked how long the game is going to be and whether there will be a lot of side quests or endgame content to keep us occupied. I generally tried to ask questions that weren't being asked by absolutely everybody because we all already know the answers, or should I say, non-answers to these questions. You know, things like, why split the story into multiple parts? We all know he's going to respond in a PR-heavy way, saying things like Midgar is iconic and saying it's on 2 Blu-rays, etc, etc. Not really an answer to the question asked. I bring this up because in the first part of my question about side quests, I snuck in that bit about how long the game was going to be, which he predictably gave a PR non-answer to, simply saying that it's a full game while hesitating to put any kind of figure to the length. What he said about side quests though was hugely encouraging. My interview with Kitase came fairly early on into the session, so I had only played around 1 hour of the 3 or so hours available to us at that point. Regarding the side quests, Kitase said, "I don't know if you've played enough yet this afternoon, but you should see that the game follows the story, these characters, from event to event at a nice rapid pace. The remake is not a full open world game, you follow the characters where the narrative draws them, but along that road we've expanded certain areas. You will come across various towns or settlements, like the Sector 7 slums for example, and these areas have really been fleshed out. This is where the story slows down a bit and lets players explore. I'm not sure if you'd really call them traditional side quests, but there are a lot of little story episodes and character episodes and side activities you can go and experience there that you couldn't in the original. One of my biggest worries was the game being padded out with meaningless side quests, you know, like getting a loaf of bread for old Grandma Plum or something. I was worried there'd just be a load of fetch quests, busy work, but thankfully that does not appear to be the route they're going. It seems like they're adding quality side content that really matters, that adds to the experience rather than pads it out. The final thing I want to talk about is important. It's important because it is what has brought me fully on board with the game and this project as a whole. The game is titled Final Fantasy VII Remake, but it isn't really a remake of Final Fantasy VII. Perhaps Final Fantasy VII Reborn would have been a more apt title because it is an almost entirely new game. The majority of you watching will have played the publicly available demo, if you've played anything at all. That demo encompasses all of Chapter 1, and let me tell you, in my experience, this chapter is the closest this game ever gets to a one-to-one remake of the original. And even then, the story and events were not entirely the same, and the dialogue was almost 100% new. Chapter 2's events are vastly different from the original, as are Chapter 7's. Add on to this 100% brand new gameplay, everything from level design to combat to customization and character growth, almost all brand new dialogue, and the very structure of the game being totally different. The vast majority of this first entry story is new. We're all expecting at least a 25 to 30 hour main story in FF7R, and there's only 5 hours of Midgar story from the original to adapt. I've started looking at FF7R not as a remake of the original, but as an epic new Final Fantasy VII compilation title. It's not meant to replace the original, or even tell the exact same story. A lot of the events from the original will indeed be retold, but they might not happen in the same way, or in the same place, or at the same time. They might happen in a different order, be completely different, or not happen at all. And in this first entry at least, the number of events from the original is absolutely dwarfed by the number of new events that will form the bulk of this game. That might disappoint you if what you wanted was something much closer to the original, but that doesn't mean you can't be excited for what it is. If you've ever imagined what a Final Fantasy VII compilation title would be like if it wasn't a weird spin-off or confined to a handheld console, you're not going to have to imagine for much longer, because Final Fantasy VII Remake is right around the corner. If you've been having mixed thoughts about the game, forget the word remake is written in the title. Pretend it's called Final Fantasy VII Reimagined, Final Fantasy VII Redefined, Final Fantasy VII Reborn. Trust me, you'll start feeling a lot better, and dare I say outright excited about this whole project once you realise what it truly is. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all soon.
Thanks for the liking, subscribing, and the sharing!